In the beginning, there was no form, no sound, no time. The earth was chaos, void, cloaked in darkness. And then God spoke. Light tore through the gloom. The heavens opened above the waters. Mountains rose from the deep. Stars blazed across the firmament. Man was shaped from the dust, woman from his side. In Eden there was peace and paths untroubled by thorns. But the serpent whispered, and everything collapsed. Sin ripped through the fabric of creation, bringing shame, pain, exile, and death. A flaming sword sealed the gates of paradise, and humanity began its flight, not only from God, but from itself. Even so, he did not relent. Neither the wickedness of Cain, nor the flood that swept the earth, nor the tower raised against the heavens could silence the promise. From Abraham to Isaac, from Jacob to Joseph, a lineage was set apart. They were fragile men, but chosen, and through them, a people would be formed. Redemption, however, did not spring from crowns or palaces. It emerged in silent deserts, in stifling cells, in the voiceless pain of those who believed without seeing. It was not led by kings, but by exiles, not forged in gold, but in sacrifice. This is not a tale of flawless heroes, but of a God who inscribes promises amid ruin, in a creation that bleeds, in brothers who betray, in cities that sink, in covenants sealed with tears. It is the story of broken families, still bound by an invisible thread, fragile, yet divine. It is through this valley of stained promises and surviving hopes that we now walk, a place called the Valley of Redemption, and it all begins here. Number 1. Adam and Eve. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Light burst forth upon the darkness. The skies were parted from the waters. The ground emerged. Time awakened. He divided the seas from the dry land and brought forth the living creatures. Mountains rose from the depths. Rivers wound their way through the valleys. The stars were hung across the heavens like eternal torches, and the earth, once lifeless, bloomed with color, scent, and motion. On the sixth day, God fashioned man in his own image and likeness. Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden, a perfect place where nothing was lacking, a garden of abundance, harmony, and beauty. The trees bowed gently to the wind. The animals walked without fear, and God spoke to man face to face. But Adam was alone, so God caused him to sleep. And from his rib, he formed the woman. Eve, they belonged to one another. Between them, there was no guilt, only communion. And in the heart of the garden stood a tree and a command. God gave them a single instruction: not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But heeding the serpent's voice, Eve was tempted and ate the fruit, offering it to Adam, who likewise disobeyed. In that moment, sin entered the world, and the perfect communion between God and humanity was shattered. Cast out from the garden, Adam and Eve faced the weight of their disobedience, and so they left, not by choice, but by sentence. For the first time, their feet touched soil no longer blessed. The wind no longer carried refreshment, and the shadows had lost their gentle warmth. With each step away from Eden, it became clearer. Something had broken, not only between man and God, but within man himself. The fall was no mere stumble. It marked the beginning of a curse that would stretch across generations, devouring all that was pure. Humanity did not merely lose paradise, it lost itself. And yet, even in exile, God's gaze remained upon them. A promise had been spoken, and amidst thorns and ash, the seed of redemption had already begun to take root. The earth, once fertile, became cursed, childbirth filled with pain, labor a daily burden, and death an inescapable certainty. Communion was lost, and Eden, once a divine refuge, remained only as a distant memory. Number 2. Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were born beneath the weight of exile, bearing in their bones the memory of lost Eden. Two brothers, marked by a world already wounded. One tilled the soil, the other tended flocks. And before God, each raised his altar. Abel, with a reverent heart, offered the finest of his firstborn, and the smoke of his sacrifice rose like a whisper received in the heavens. Cain, however, brought fruits from the ground, yet his offering lacked inward surrender, and when God turned his face towards only one, the silence between the brothers became a chasm. Cain's countenance grew dark, envy slithered in like a serpent, and in the field, far from any witness, wrath burst forth into violence. Abel fell. The first human blood stained the still virgin soil of creation. The earth, once blooming beneath the breath of the divine, opened to drink the voice of the innocent. And since that moment, that cry has never ceased. Cain was sentenced to wander. He became a fugitive not only upon the roads but within himself. He founded cities, fathered lineages, raised walls. Yet all he built stood beneath the shadow of guilt. Humanity multiplied, but did not lift its gaze upward. They fashioned instruments, sang songs, held feasts, but forgot the one who had formed them. The hands that once tended Eden now watered the earth with violence. The eyes that once beheld God now longed only for themselves. And the Creator, seeing the corruption spreading like smoke across the fields, spoke his judgment. "My spirit shall not abide in man forever." The time of patience was drawing to a close, and judgment already walked among men. Number 3. The Flood. After the tragic murder of Abel by Cain, sin continued to spread throughout humanity. As generations passed, the wickedness of mankind multiplied, corrupting the earth and drawing them ever further from God. Violence and depravity became so rampant that God, in his justice, resolved to bring an end to the corruption through a great flood that would cleanse the earth. Yet there was one righteous man, Noah, who still walked with God. God instructed Noah to build a great ark, for he would spare Noah, his family, and a remnant of every living creature. While Noah labored diligently in obedience, constructing the ark to the precise dimensions given, his neighbors mocked him, scoffing at the notion of divine judgment. But Noah stood firm, knowing that the word of the Lord would not fail. When the flood finally began, waters burst forth from the heavens and the depths, consuming all that lay around. Laughter gave way to terror, and the ark became the sole refuge of salvation. For 40 days and 40 nights, the waters surged over the world, erasing every trace of corruption. Yet Noah and his family remained safe within the ark, along with the creatures entrusted to his care. When the rain ceased and the waters began to recede, Noah sent out a dove to see if the earth had dried. The bird returned with an olive branch in its beak, a sign of hope, of renewal. Once the ark came to rest upon solid ground, Noah and his household stepped out and offered sacrifices of thanksgiving unto God. And in response, God established a covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth by flood. As an everlasting sign of that promise, he set the rainbow in the sky. Number 4. The Tower of Babel. After the flood, the earth lay in silence and promise. From the sons of Noah, the first men spread across the land, carrying with them both the memory of judgment and the breath of a new beginning. Yet mankind, though spared by the waters, still bore the seed of pride. Rather than scattering as they had been commanded, they gathered upon a plain called Shinar. There, restless hearts longed to touch the heavens with their own hands. "Let us build a tower," they said, "a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered across the face of the earth." And brick by brick, they raised not merely a structure, but a symbol of defiance, a monument to human vanity. The heavens watched, and God came down, beholding the city rising upon foundations of pride. Then he confused their speech. Where once there had been one voice, there now emerged unfamiliar sounds, broken words, fragmented tongues. Unity collapsed, and the work was forsaken. The tower remained unfinished, left as ruin and warning. And there was born Babel, where the language of man became a mirror of his division. Scattered across the continents, they became peoples and nations, each with its own tongue, its own memory, its own distance, not only geographical, but spiritual. The tower fell, but man's arrogance would continue to seek heaven by crooked paths. So God came down and touched the speech of mankind. In a moment, the shared tongue unraveled. Words once familiar turned to foreign sounds, splintered syllables, broken cadence. Entire languages sprang forth like rivers in diverging streams, flowing from the heart of confusion. A builder called out to his companion, but no reply came. The overseer raised his voice, only to be met with empty stares. They tried to communicate through gestures, repetitions, signs, but all in vain. The bond of language was shattered, and with it, the project. The tower, once climbing by united hands, halted at the sound of division. There, Babel was born, the cradle of tongues, of nations, of the borders the earth still bears. Each people departed with its own speech, its customs, its memory, and the plain, once filled by a single purpose, fell silent. All that remained was the halted structure, left to the mercy of time, a witness to the pride that dared to reach the heavens. Since then, men have kept on building. But the words with which they try to bridge the distance still carry the echo of that scattering. Number 5. The promise to Abraham. Amid scattered nations and fractured tongues, when the world seemed adrift in its own course, God called a man. His name was Abram. He lived among idols and ancient customs in a land accustomed to human voices. But it was the voice of the Eternal that reached him, saying, "Leave your country, your kindred, and your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you." It was a simple, resolute command. Go, leave everything, land, family, passed and walked towards a place yet unseen. Thus began the journey, not marked by maps or certainties, but by a calling that demanded faith. God promised that from him would arise a great nation, that his descendants would dwell in a land still silent, that his name would become a blessing among the peoples. But the years passed, and Sarai's womb remained closed. The promise seemed to retreat with every changing season. With every night when the sky displayed stars he could not yet count. And still he remained, waiting, praying, dwelling in tents upon foreign soil, sustained by something the world around him could not grasp. And when the time came, God sealed a covenant. He asked for a sacrifice. The animals were divided, and a torch of fire passed between them. In that solemn moment, God gave Abram a new name. From then on, he would be called Abraham, not merely because he aged, but because within his weary frame stirred the beginning of a living promise. He would be a father, and from his children would come a people who would endure centuries, wars, captivity, and deserts. A people upon whom the thread of redemption would rest. For God had chosen to write his story through people, to keep his word alive across generations. The promise passed to Isaac, the son born when Abraham and Sarah were already aged, the fruit of a long and improbable wait. Direct heir to the divine covenant, he carried not only the blood of his father, but the weight of the pledge. Isaac was not merely a bridge between generations. He was the one who preserved the faith in times when God seemed silent. He faced trials much like Abraham's, Rebekah's barrenness, the wandering through foreign lands, the discipline of waiting without assurances. Without grand deeds or battles, he held fast to the flame of the promise. And through him, the tension between divine plan and human choice entered a new chapter. But the destiny of the lineage was not yet settled. Within the tent, amidst the pains of Rebekah's labor, something extraordinary stirred. Not merely sons, but nations. And once more, the voice of God would chart the course. Number 6. Esau and Jacob, the birth of Israel. Esau never had a choice. Even before he drew breath, a sentence lay heavy upon his shoulders. While still in the womb, a struggle unfolded between two brothers, two peoples, two promises. One would be served, the other would serve. And the elder, though born first, would not carry the blessing. This was what God had declared, and time would soon confirm it. From the very beginning, their paths diverged. Esau was the strength of the earth, the haste of the wind, raw power unmeasured. A natural hunter, he came alive in the scent of the forest, in the heat of fresh blood, in the fleeting instant when life escaped and death became his own. The world for him was physical, immediate, brutal, and it was there among dust and sweat that his identity took form. Jacob, in silence, forged a different road. He watched, he listened, he understood that the future was not won by strength alone, but by keen eyes and measured words. While Esau gathered trophies, Jacob gathered opportunities. He knew the worth of every gesture, the weight of every right, especially that of the firstborn. Isaac loved Esau. In him he saw the ideal heir, the one who would carry forward the name and strength of their house. But Rebekah held another vision. She remembered the promise. She knew God had already chosen, and in Jacob's quiet strategy, she saw the mark, of that divine choice. The exchange happened on a dry day, when exhaustion dulled judgment. Esau returned from the hunt, famished. The scent of stew was unbearable. He asked for a bowl, and Jacob, unhurried, offered more than food. He offered a pact. In exchange for the meal, he demanded the birthright. Guided by hunger and haste, Esau agreed. And there, in the steam of a simple dish, history changed hands. Time passed. Isaac grew old, and his sight no longer reached the faces before him. The hour of the blessing had come, the final word of a patriarch. Esau was sent to hunt and prepare his father's favorite meal. But Rebekah heard and acted. She clothed Jacob in Esau's garments, covered his arms with skins, and swiftly prepared the dish. Before the blind father, Jacob spoke, pretended, touched, and received. The blessing was given, irrevocable, sealed. Esau came too late. The meat still steamed, but the future had already been served. Pain tore through him. He cried out, pleaded for another blessing, any word. But Isaac trembled. He knew what he had done, and what had been spoken could not be undone. What had been given now dwelled in Jacob. Esau vowed vengeance. With eyes burning and soul wounded, he uttered words like blades. When my father dies, I will kill Jacob. And Rebekah, hearing once more, understood what had to be done. She sent her son away, his skin still bearing the scent of the blessing. Jacob fled, and Esau remained, with the bitter taste of a meal that should never have cost so much. But that day was not the end. Though wounded, Esau found other paths. He married daughters from Ishmael's line, seeking again the favor of his father's gaze. He built his people, his land, his story. And when the sons of Jacob returned to claim their inheritance, they would find more than distant kin. They would find a kingdom forged in pain and by the sword. For Esau had been cast aside, but he had not vanished. He waited, he grew, he endured, and he carved his own name among the nations. It was in that moment of history, between a meal and a blessing, between flight and vengeance, that the promise took a new direction. What had begun in Abraham and passed through Isaac now narrowed to Jacob. There was not yet a people, not yet a name, but the thread of the covenant had moved from one and bound itself to the other. Esau, though firstborn, was set aside, and Jacob, though cunning, was chosen to carry the legacy. The name Israel had not yet been spoken, but it had already begun to take root in the tension between the two brothers. Like a seed buried beneath years of exile, conflict, and unfulfilled promise, the nation that would rise from Jacob was beginning, not with a crown or an army, but with a silent, irreversible choice made by God. Israel was not yet known by name, but its presence began to stir in Jacob's movements, in Rebekah's silences, in Isaac's confusion, and in Esau's restrained fury. Something new was being shaped in the unseen, a destiny not born of natural order, but of an ancient choice made by a God who sees beyond the moment. What formed that day was more than a quarrel between brothers. It was the beginning of a path that would stretch across generations, bearing the marks of flight, of promise, of separation, and of calling. The blessing given to Jacob sealed a future that reached beyond family, a future that would become a nation summoned into existence. And it was there, in the midst of division, that the story of Israel began to take form. Number 7. The Journey of Joseph. Among all the sons of Jacob, Joseph was born marked by favor. He came from the love of Rachel, the long-awaited wife, and represented the promise blossomed when hope had all but faded. Jacob held a special affection for him, made evident in the gift of a richly colored robe, woven with threads of tenderness and distinction. Yet, in the midst of sibling rivalry, such favors do not go unnoticed. Jealousy turned to simmering hatred. Joseph dreamed. He dreamed of sheaves of wheat bowing before his own. He dreamed of stars and celestial bodies surrounding him in reverence. He shared these visions without malice, but in the ears of his brothers, they sounded like vanity. Being older, they would not tolerate such presumptions, so they resolved to silence the dreamer. They cast him into a dry cistern and soon after sold him into slavery to merchants crossing the desert. They returned to their father with a blood-stained robe and a cruel lie. Jacob, overwhelmed with grief, believed wild beasts had torn him apart. Meanwhile, Joseph breathed the air of a foreign land, shackled in chains that led him to Egypt. There he served in the household of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Though bound to lowly service, the radiance of his character shone through. There was a quiet order in his ways that made all prosper, a deep strength that earned him respect. Yet even virtue could not shield him from another trap. Falsely accused, he was thrown into a cold prison where hope so often withers. But even in the darkness behind bars, his gift for interpreting dreams remained like a lamp in a cavern. That gift, in time, lifted him from the shadows. When Pharaoh was troubled by dreams of fat cows and lean ones, word reached him of Joseph, the Hebrew who could read the hidden meaning in omens. Joseph was brought from the dungeon and stood before the throne with no embellishments, bearing the simplicity of one who lived in obscurity, yet the certainty of one who knew the voice from on high. He unveiled the coming of 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. He advised Pharaoh to store grain, to manage the land wisely. Impressed, Pharaoh appointed him over all Egypt. The very Joseph who had been sold like a possession now presided over the abundance of a foreign empire. And famine came, silent, relentless. It swept through the fields, consumed the harvests, and decimated the herds. It reached Canaan, where Jacob, now aged and worn, sent his sons to seek food. They departed, never imagining they would kneel before the very brother whose future they had tried to erase. Joseph, now robed in power and splendor, recognized them at once. His heart in that moment wavered between the memory of the cistern and the desire to test the change in their souls. He tried them, watched closely, sought signs of remorse. When he discerned their sincere contrition, his heart could no longer hold back. The walls broke. He wept. He was no longer just Egypt's ruler. He was still the boy who had once cried out from the bottom of a dry pit. He revealed his identity, and his brothers were struck with awe. The family, once torn, was bound together by the balm of forgiveness. Joseph sent for Jacob, offered him a home in fertile lands, and sustained all the house of Israel. The very pain that had exiled him became a bridge of salvation. "You meant evil against me," he said, "but God turned it for good, to preserve many lives." His words closed a circle of faith, destiny, and mercy. The son once despised had become the guardian of nations. The wound became comfort for those suffering in scarcity. In Egypt, the family of Abraham grew and thrived for a time. The land that once sustained them would one day turn harsh, enslaving the descendants of Joseph. And when suffering returned, they would cry out for deliverance. But that is another story. Conclusion. A silent twilight settles over the end of Genesis. But this is no ending. It is the beginning of something stirring beneath the surface. The promise once whispered to Abraham has crossed deserts, broken covenants, and forgotten dreams. By the time we arrive in Egypt, we find a seed poised to break through the soil, though its roots remain wrapped in uncertainty. The story begins with the divine breath that brings order to chaos and weaves through deep valleys, blood-stained paths, and desolate fields until it finds pause in a foreign land. This journey is not crowned with festive closure. Instead, it reveals that each generation bears both the frailty of its humanity and the breath of the eternal. And though the nation of Israel does not yet occupy a defined space upon the map, it already lives within the heart of Jacob and in the lives of his descendants, kept by a faithfulness that endures failure and forsaking. Genesis concludes on Egyptian soil, where Jacob's family has found shelter. Yet, this refuge will one day become a place of bondage. Still, the promise remains unbroken. Human failings did not erase the divine purpose. They merely tilled the ground for what is to come. In the quiet that precedes the next chapter, the seed continues to grow. When the Exodus unfolds, we shall see that this time in a foreign land served to shape the people who would emerge as the rightful heirs of the covenant. Genesis draws to a close, but the thread of the story stretches forward, ready to blossom in the tale yet to be told.